Good afternoon, everybody. It's Lisa Baker here at Quilt Babble Live with my co-host Rona. Woo! So tonight is all about domestic quilting, and as you can see, we have some lovely ladies here to talk to us about this. One of your all's favorite episodes that we had was long arm quilting, and then I had the people say, what about us? We want to do it free motion quilting on our domestic machine. So Rona went out and found these lovely ladies, and here we are. So Rona, what are we? Season 2, episode 2?
Yep. 2. Yeah. 22. We're 22.
We are 22. We're almost like legal and stuff. As you guys can see, Rona is in the United States with us this month. So this is fabulous. But speaking of United States, only one of our guests is from the United States, and 2 of our other guests is from over the pond. But we'll start with Miss Jane. You all are familiar with her face if you've been following us on Quilt Babble Live. Jane, go ahead and remind everybody who you are, what you do, and how they can find you.
I am Jane Hauprich. I am owner of Stitch by Stitch Custom Quilting. I am a long arm quilter, but I started on a domestic machine. I still do quilt on my free motion quilt on my domestic machine just because I love moving the fabric around sometimes. And I teach on that too. So yeah, so here I am. And thanks for having me.
Now, do you teach only in person, or do you also do Zoom classes?
I also teach on Zoom. Yes. Yes, and I do lectures and classes for guilds also.
There you go. There you go. Okay, Miss Sheena, tell us all about you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheena, and my business is Green Man Quilts. I am a walking foot quilter. I try to avoid free motion. It is the devil's art. But other people do it brilliantly, but my thing is walking foot quilting, and
love it.
I teach online and in person. I give talks and online workshops, everything, absolutely everything.
And where are you
looking forward to doing some stuff for the US on Zoom?
Yeah. Where are you located?
I live in Watford, which is just north of London.
Just north of London. I love it. Do you have a website where they can find you, or social media too?
I do. It's www.greenmanquilts, all one word, .co.uk. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook as Green Man Quilts.
Yeah, and we'll put links in the chat too for you guys as well, so you can definitely check out these ladies and all their amazing work. Okay, your turn, Joe.
Okay, so I'm Jo Westfoot from the Crafty Nomad, and like Sheena, I'm based in the UK, which is sunny, believe it or not, at the moment, given it's October. I teach online. I have an online membership called the Quilt Hive, and I also offer courses in free motion quilting, foundation paper piecing, lots of different things really. And the Quilt Hive kind of has classes, spanning a large spectrum of patchwork and quilting in it. Let's see, I've been quilting, I'm going to say 13 years, I guess. It might be there or thereabouts. So yeah. Oh, and you can find me at thecraftynomad.co.uk.
And remind me, Rona, do you like to do domestic quilting, either free motion or crosshatch in the ditch?
I actually I use a long arm friend for most of my quilts, especially the samples, like for my patterns and my books, and that's mostly because of time. Like, I don't have as much time to sit down and quilt them on my domestic machine, but the ones that I do, you know what, I don't do a lot of stitch in the ditch. I generally do stippling, which is kind of my go-to all over, free motion. I like the way it looks, depending on what the top looks like, because of course, that all depends too which design you're doing. But yeah, so I do dabble in a little domestic machine quilting.
That's me. I'm a dabbler. And Sheena, I'm just going to tell you, you won me over when you said free motion is the devil's heart or whatever. That is exactly what I feel. Now, if I was retired and I had more time, just like Rona said, I think practice makes perfect, and I would, obviously do better and enjoy it more, but it literally, So for those that are new out in the world, Sheena, they may not know what stitch in the ditch means. Talk about that real quick. Explain to the beginners out there.
Ditch in the ditch is to be avoided at all costs. It is the very worst type of thing you can suggest a new quilter does, because that involves stitching in a straight line, and if your seams aren't quite straight, your quilting is going to be a bit wonky, and even if your seams are straight, you're going to wiggle. So for my very, very beginners, I suggest nice, gentle, organic, wavy lines. So a serpentine, a just gentle wiggle from side to side serpentine. You can do that top to the bottom of the quilt. You don't have to mark it. You can't go wrong.
Exactly.
You absolutely can't go wrong. And it looks lovely and it looks clever.
Okay, let me ask. So there's been some controversy that I've seen on certain Facebook groups about when you're quilting from edge to edge. Do you go down one side, turn, and then go up the other? Or do you go all the same top to bottom?
Yeah,
All
always the same direction. When you're piecing, you want to go top to bottom, bottom to top. So that prevents your strips getting a wave in them. But when you're quilting, you want to work your quilt always in the same direction. Don't start in the middle. Start towards the middle of the top or bottom or one side or whatever of your quilt, and just always go in that same direction. I think, Joe, you'd agree with me.
With straight line quilting, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's different for other types of quilting.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. When people are advising on Facebook and various things, they don't always have the big picture to give the right advice.
Yes.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah,
because
I've fallen foul of doing exactly the opposite of that, years ago. And I think I had a quilt that was going to be in the quilter's planner a few years ago, and it was a big quilt, and I had to turn it in order to get it through the machine. And straight away you have the rippling happening, where you get this it's just like a ripple, really, and that's what you'll get rippling throughout between your lines of stitching if you turn the quilt. It was so obvious to me. I think I unpicked so much to try and get it to look a little bit flatter. So yeah, it's definitely worth scrunching up the quilt as much as you can to get it in there to make it work all from one direction. Yeah,
absolutely.
Jane, what is another term? So we've kind of defined, or Sheena did, what stitch in the ditch is. What is another term in domestic machine quilting that we might say that a beginner would not know what that meant? I know Rona mentioned the word stippling a while ago. Beginners may not know what that means, but since you teach some domestic machine quilting, what are some of the things that the beginners that you realize that you have to define for them?
Quilt as desired.
There is that. Quilt as desired, yes. But to go back real quick on what Sheena said about the wavy lines, that's one of the things I teach in my classes when we're doing, I'll teach a crosshatch, and I'll show them how if you don't get that spacing just right with straight lines, it really glares at you if there's a spacing issue. But if you use a curvy line in there instead of a straight line, it hides any spacing issues because you're not seeing them as much as with the straight line. So I love that comment about the wavy lines.
That's my number one go-to on my sewing machine when I'm quilting anything is that serpentine stitch because it hides a multitude of sin. But skipping around, unfortunately, but Jane mentioned it, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Sheena mentioned earlier about, not necessarily having to mark and do all of this stuff, but when you are doing your spacing and stuff, clearly, if you're cross hatching or anything, there is some marking involved unless you have the guide. Who wants to kind of talk about that real quick for the beginner that is just doing some straight quilting?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I do quite a lot of straight line quilting mixed in with free motion. So, and because it's on a domestic, you have to switch between your walking foot and your darning foot because I don't have a ruler foot for my machine. So I would go with that. And so absolutely marking out those lines is really important. And finding the right marking tool for what you're working on is also vital. My go-to marking tools would be either the Hera marker. I have a retractable chalk pencil that I absolutely love. Obviously, that's not great for white fabric, so there may be an occasion where I want to use a pen. The pen that I would use would be an air erasable and water erasable pen by Prim. Because it's got a really fine nib, so the tip is super fine, allows you to be able to follow it really easily. So having the right marking tool is really important for the fabric. So whether you're working with dark fabric, light fabric, that's something to consider. Pens are something that comes up a lot, and which pens to use and to not use. And the world of sewing went through a phase of lauding the Frixion pen and saying how absolutely wonderful it was for sewing and marking and stuff. And it still is on occasion. I still have them in my kit and I still use them for certain things. But I would never use them for marking out quilting because invariably they will either come back if the item is placed in a cold place, or, they will mark it. There are some fabrics, dark fabrics particularly, that have been sort of heavily starched in their making process, and when you try and iron that pen out, it will leave a white shadow line there which will never go, even with washing. And so be very, very careful at what you put on the front of your quilt, when it comes to marking tools. Buy something that is specifically designed for that purpose, basically. It would be my advice.
I generally have, because when I don't do stippling, I do, there's some quilts that I've done where I've actually designed specifically to match the quilt top. And same thing, I've used the white chalk pen, but then also the light blue water erasable. I don't know the brand name of it. I don't remember.
Pen. I think it's by Clover and it's Choco Pen.
Right. And those, but it's like you said, specifically designed and marketed as a quilting pen, like to mark the top, because it does wash out, and that's what you really want, is something that's going to wash out so it doesn't come back.
Absolutely. Joe, you mentioned a while ago, which is the first time we've hit on this, but let's go back and dig in a little bit deeper. You had mentioned 2 different feet.
Okay.
Go and explain once again for the beginner that's never done anything, what type of feet and where you would apply which foot. And
okay, so when you're quilting, you want to have a specific type of foot on the machine because you're adding in that extra layer of batting, and so regular feet just cannot cope with having a very thick amount of fabric being put underneath the foot and to cope with it well. So if you are wanting to stitch your straight lines, then you would grab a walking foot, which is a kind of foot that has almost like a second set of feed dogs on the top. So it kind of acts in like a kind of alligator or crocodile motion, and it grabs the fabric and pulls it through from the top as well as the bottom. And I say that specifically over some of the built-in features that some of the high-end machines will have. So some of the high-end machines for Benina and for Pfaff will have what's called either an integrated walk-in foot or an integrated feed foot or a dual feed. I would never use those for quilting. They're not man enough, in my opinion, to actually deal with that bulk of the quilts. They're great for pattern matching and other instances where you would want to have that even feed. But for quilting, definitely a walking foot is going to help you help your quilt come through the machine more evenly. It will help you get nice even stitches basically coming through there. Now, if you want to go into free motion quilting, you're going to need to get a completely different foot for your machine. Often referred to as a darning foot or a free motion embroidery foot, a free motion foot. They can be called a number of different things. They look completely different to a regular foot. They attach completely differently to a regular foot.
Is that the one that looks like the half moon?
I'll show you what it looks like.
There you go. Jane's got one. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's the one I use.
Look like something like that.
Yeah.
And what that does is it will hover above your quilt, and so allows your quilt to move more freely. And you'll combine that with lowering your feed dogs on your machine. So the feed dogs are those rough bits of metal under the foot that come up, and they kind of manually move your quilt one stitch at a time. That's what controls the length of your stitch when you set your control setting on your machine. Once you lower those, you're in control of moving that fabric and creating the length of that stitch. So yeah, so those are the feet that you would want to use. And I think I mentioned ruler foot earlier, which I don't have and want to have.
I've seen Jane grabbing one.
There you go. So if you look between what Jane's holding up to the camera and what I'm holding up, you can see that Jane's is much thicker at the bottom. So it can basically run alongside a ruler and not jump on top of it. All right. So it's going to be able to just slide along that ruler quite happily without jumping on top and damaging it.
Absolute. And no matter what brand machine you guys have out there, I promise you the maker of that machine has these feet. Most of them do not come with your machine unless you are kind of like Joe said, top of the line in some of them. But even at that, you're not going to get that spring action foot with it. Those are going to be add-ons for sure. Sheena, when you're teaching a class of beginners and they're going to be non-free motion quilting, do you suggest that they start with like a coaster, a placemat? Like, what is a beginning project for someone versus starting with something this massive?
If I'm doing my absolute beginners in a day course, then it's just making a sort of 12-inch table center. And so the aim of doing that is that they will do some piecing. They will start off with learning how to use a rotary cutter, learning how to stitch a 1/4-inch seam and how to create a 1/4-inch seam either with a specific foot, or if they don't have the correct foot, how to compensate for it. So cutting, stitching, piecing together, joining, making nice neat joins, adding borders, layering, quilting, and binding. It's a full-on day.
When you're teaching them to do that sandwich, are you teaching them with pins, or are you teaching them with spray adhesive like a 505? Like,
I will show both. The advantage is that because it's just a 12-inch square, it can't go terribly wrong, even if they don't have pins, even if they only have straight pins. So I will demonstrate with pins and with 505 spray.
A true teacher, so optimistic. It can't go that wrong.
It can't. It absolutely can't. Nothing can.
I've made some disasters on a 12-inch square. Let's just be real.
Oh, no. We don't have disasters.
It's like Bob Ross. We have
design adjustments. we have variations.
Right.
We have completely, totally different journeys, but
love
we
it.
never have a disaster and we never have anything going wrong because there's always a way to make it work.
That's
Right.
true.
I call those my I meant to do that
Yes.
projects.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta ask a quick poll. Starting with Jane, do you pin or do you spray based?
Yes.
You both? Is it like
It
depending on the project?
it does depend on the project. And I like to pin. I don't like spray based a lot, but I do use it sometimes just because it will last a lot longer. I also like the fusible batting because sometimes that's nice to use too. That way you don't have to worry about all the spray base. But I think what I find that people do that has been an issue for me in the past is overspraying. And then that gunks up the needle too much, the thread gets damaged and it breaks and it's just, it's a hot mess. So I just, I do spray base some, but mostly I like to pin.
What about you, Joe?
Oh, I'm a pin baster 100%, and I have a very funny reason why.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
I used spray based once, and I usually, and they're bare today, but usually I have my nails gel painted. If you ever need your gel nails removing in a very quick way, just give them a spray with 505 and they will peel straight off.
Oh.
So yeah, expensive mistake, never used it since.
Wow. That is definitely a word to the wise there. I never even would have thought of that. What about you, Sheena? Because you said you teach both, or you showed both. Which do you prefer?
I'm a spray based. Absolutely. Despite in one class having someone spray to the extent that the spray went all over the table and the floor around it. So I now demonstrate far more clearly exactly how much spray base to use. It was ages cleaning that floor.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I made the mistake one time of using spray based. Thank goodness it was a very small project, but I used spray based and carpet, and that was horrific. So yeah, I take my studio has carpet on it, so I do it out in the garage now, just specifically for that purpose. But yeah, personally, I prefer spray basting. It's just every time I've tried to pin a project, especially a bigger bed size quilt, it always goes wonky. No matter what type of quilting I'm doing on it, it just works for me. I can't keep it straight, but that's a personal thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm an anti-pin, even if I'm piecing or anything. I will do wonder clips for that and spray base for anything I'm quilting for sure.
Oh, well, speaking of pins, Jane, what type of, when you do pin, what type of, talk about, because there's specific quilting pins versus straight pins. Talk about those, what those are.
I was looking in my stash over here, but I don't have one handy, but I like to use straight pins, and there's this little nub that you can put on the end. It's called a pin more, and it's like a little gel type cylinder, and it can go right on the end, and that way as you're quilting you can easily just pull them out, because I'm forever with a safety pin breaking my nails, and so I like the idea of the straight pin and just pulling off that little nub at the end.
And what is that called again that you're saying?
It's called a pin more. It's PINMOOR.
Huh.
And they're yeah, I don't know if I have any. I've been looking. I think they must be upstairs with some
That's
of my
also a
teaching
good way,
stuff.
so you're not sticking yourself as you're moving around, because you're saying
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
I
Joe,
like those.
Joe, I saw you get up and grab something.
So I use curved safety pins so that the quilt will remain flat, but I've got two here because I want to show you. I started off with these silver ones because they were readily available in the shops, And then I found these brass ones, which are actually quite a bit thinner than the silver ones. I think they're by Prim, and they just seem to be kinder to the fabric. They don't, some of these cheaper, I don't know if they're cheaper, but some of these silver ones would have burrs on the end and would catch your fabric and then damage it, whereas these ones seem to be a lot better. So I would definitely recommend these ones.
And those also look like they have more of a gentle curve in them, where the silver ones are like a V almost.
Yeah, they do look a little bit different, don't they? Yeah, they are a little bit different. You're right. I hadn't noticed that, but yeah, they are more gentle. Yeah, it's very, very gentle difference, but yeah, they are different. Yeah.
And Sheena, you straight spray base, right? So no pins.
I will pin around the edge.
Okay.
Because I find that if a quilt is being left for a while, if the air gets into it, then the spray dissipates.
Mm-hmm.
So I pin right around the edge just to help avoid that, and then encourage people when they're storing their quilts and not quilting for a while, we fold edges into the middle. So again, the raw edges are enclosed by the quilt, which reduces the chance of the spray disappearing into thin air.
Yeah, definite. Before we talk about the quilt management, the weight of the quilt and all of that, let's talk, we've talked about feet and we've talked about how we're basting. Let's talk about thread. Top thread, bobbin thread, size, weight, 2 different colors, same color. Who wants to start chit-chatting about that? Jane?
Sure. I usually tell, especially beginners, but even still in my long arming business, my rule of thumb is to use the same color top and bottom, because I don't care how perfect you are. Everybody's going to have that little pop attention issue here and there. And that hides a multitude of that. So it's really a good idea. I like to use a thinner thread. I usually use a 50 weight to 100 weight. What I tell my students is that weight will blend in with your quilting more, whereas a 40 weight or lower will be more prominent on your quilt. And the good thing is there's no right or wrong answer. It's kind of a personal preference. So it's just what you like, but I tend to do a lot of more dense quilting, so I like the thinner thread, and because it allows the quilt to still stay pliable and soft and not get kind of hard.
Yeah, I think it depends on how much you want your quilting to show, right? Like you were saying, with the thickness of the thread and that sort of thing, and the design. Yeah, I generally try to match the quilt top, and same thing, use front and back the same. Or I should say top thread and bobbin thread the same. But I have done one quilt where, well, I didn't do it, my long armor did, but we always work together to decide the thread colors. But we specifically used a color that was much lighter than the background of the quilt, because we wanted it to show. We wanted to see that design in the overall quilt. So yeah, it definitely depends on what you want your quilt to look like.
Yeah, I think people shouldn't be afraid to play with thread either. I think that,
Exactly.
People get very hung up over which thread is the right thread, like Jane was saying, to use, and there really isn't one. And the fact is that you will get different effects with different thread that you choose, and that's not just in weight. Weight just refers to the thickness of the thread, if you like, for any beginners out there, but also in terms of type of thread. I mean, I've been told by experienced quilters never to use rayon for quilting. Now, no, you absolutely can, provided you're using it on something that's not going to be heavily used and washed. Absolutely can be used on a wall hanging or something like that. Yeah, you probably wouldn't choose to use it on a quilt you're going to give to a 3-year-old, who's going to be in and out of the wash all the time. You're going to want something durable for that, for sure. But there are no rights and wrongs, absolutely. I mean, I've just quilted a quilt this summer using 12 weight thread on free motion, and it gave me the effect I wanted, which was I wanted it to look like doodles. I wanted it to stand out, and it did that. So yeah, play with it, have fun with it, I think is what I would say.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Playing is key.
That's the
Yeah,
whole point of quilting, isn't it? To play and have fun
to play. And
and creative.
yeah, I always tell my students too to not compare yourself to what other somebody else is doing,
Yeah.
Yes.
because that's will steal the joy right out of your quilting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, if you're just starting out, just be proud of what you're doing. And
Yeah.
same thing like with the contrasting, like if you use, and I tell them if you use contrasting thread, just realize that any mistakes or wobbles are going to show up on there. And
Right.
if you make a mistake or what you think is a mistake, just make 2 or 3 more and it looks like you intentionally did it, and
Yeah.
then you're good to go. But if you have a blending thread, most times it doesn't show up. So
Yeah.
nobody's going to see it but you. But we're all
Yeah, so
super
if a-
critical of our work,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know.
and I love Sheena how you said that it's your own journey, and it's true that directly goes to don't compare yourself to others and your work, because it is your journey, and what you like may not be what somebody else likes, and vice versa.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I also encourage them to make up a trial sandwich, a decent sized trial sandwich, and try the obvious quilting thread.
Mhm.
Try some different quilting threads. Try one that you absolutely know won't work, because it's surprising how many times that then becomes the perfect thread.
Mm.
Try your stitch length. Play with your stitch length until you get one that looks right on your quilt sandwich, because with walking foot quilting, if you use your normal construction size of stitch length, it's going to disappear and just look like, I don't know,
Yeah.
pointy things. So you want to lengthen your stitch. You want to play to check that the tension is right.
Yeah.
And absolutely, as Jane said, same top and bottom, hides a multitude of sins on the tension front.
I think the only thing I would add about thread, actually, which we haven't mentioned, is when you're playing with all the different types and weights of thread, just to make sure you have the right needle.
Yes.
That was my next thing we were going to. Needle. Start talking, Joe.
It's just so frustrating when you're teaching a class and people are having frustrations with what they're sewing or quilting, and they haven't got the basics right in terms of the right size or type needle with the thread or the project that they're working on. It makes such a difference. Just think, if you are trying to force really thick thread through a really teeny tiny hole, it's not going to want to go, is it? And you're going to get problems and thread breakages and bent needles and all of those horrible things that come with that. So really, drilling down with the manufacturer of the thread to find out what their recommendations are for what size needles for those types of thread is really important. Type of needle is another thing to suggest. I quilt sometimes with metallic thread, I do. And I wouldn't do that without a metallic needle, or a top stitch needle in, because the thread would just cry.
Yeah.
It wouldn't like it. So yeah, really important.
It is. I tell everybody all the time when they're here in the shop, different things. I'm like, you don't want to do anything that's going to mess with the integrity of that thread, because then the longevity of your project, you've already put it at risk. But I will say, and if somebody's already mentioned it, forgive me, but when I start a new quilting project, I'm in Sheena's world. I'm quilting by walking foot. I'm not doing this, but a brand new needle, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time I do a project, I always start with a brand new needle. And a lot of people, if you there's pictures out there of like hyper zoomed in on the tips of a brand new needle versus one that you've just finished piecing a top with, and the difference is very stark with the curvature, because those tips snap off if you accidentally hit a pin or whatever. So it every time that stitch or that needle goes through, it dulls it just a little bit. So yeah, definitely sharp needles or brand new needles.
Yeah, Renee, because we're going through a sandwich, right? It's not just a little thin layer of quilter's cotton at this point. And it's really funny. Most of you talk about teaching, so I'm sure you've heard it. Students, I've noticed when you say change a needle or change the blade in the rotary cutter, it's just like you have asked them to like shave their head or something. And I'm just like, these are standards, just like your maintenance of your machine, just cleaning out the bobbin area and different stuff. It's the small things. And I know we all get excited. We want to play with the fabric and we want to see how that block turns out, but those things really will make a difference in your experience.
Yeah, you want to have a smooth sewing experience, right?
Yeah.
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 Because yeah, it's all about having fun. Okay, so I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Jane.
I was going to say I know people use different brands of thread, and this isn't about the brand, but Superior Threads has a great resource on their website. It's a thread weight to needle size chart, and there's one for domestic and there's one for long arm. And I print that out and I suggest that my students do, because it's just whether you use their thread or not, you can still look at, oh, look, I'm using a 40 weight thread. This is the size needle I should be starting out with. And it doesn't mean that needle isn't, say it uses a specific size needle and you try it and it doesn't work. You can always go up a size or down a size, but it's a good starting point.
Yeah. I didn't know they had that. I'll have to look that up.
It's
Print
great.
it out. Yeah. Because I have a thing that I printed out, like Schmetz. They have one too, but it's what the different needles are, not necessarily which
really
to use
useful,
which
though.
thread.
Yeah.
But that's the one that I have. Yeah.
Can I just add one really, really important thing for beginners, which is remembering to thread your machine with the presser foot up.
I'm so glad you said that.
Because when the presser foot is down, the tension discs are snapped together. When it's up, they're apart. And you want the thread to go between the tension discs and snug into them. And then you can put the presser foot down and they'll be in place. Very often, if someone is having trouble with tension, it's because it's not in the discs properly, or if they've got a top loading machine, it's jumped out of that little nick across the bobbin, or they haven't changed their needle since God was a boy, or when they bought their machine. It worked when I bought the machine.
Right.
Oh my gosh, Sheena, that's hilarious.
Yeah. So rethread, tension discs open, new needle, and that's at least 80% of all tension issues solved.
Yeah.
Although
the only thing I was going to, sorry, go on,
okay,
Jane.
go ahead, Joe. No, go ahead.
I was going to say the only thing I would add is that when you're free motion quilting, you find that a lot of beginners will forget that then presser foot is down and they will take their sandwich out. It will struggle because obviously the tension discs are there, but they'll yank it out anyway. And then they'll wonder, why it's not freely moving, and it's because that's not up. So you sometimes get issues with that, because obviously you do have a level of movement with your darning foot that you wouldn't have with a regular foot. Sorry, Jane, go on.
No, that's okay. I was going to say too, when you're changing out to different weight threads, a lot of people don't realize that they do have to change and move their tension dial. And a lot of people most times when I teach a class, they're like, no, I've never touched it and I don't want to touch it. And I'm like, well, if you want a free motion quilt, you're going to touch it and you're going to change it, and you're going to find out it's okay to do it. And but they don't realize that is something that can be changed, and they're very afraid of that. So
it seems to be a real fear, doesn't it, that runs through.
It does. Yep. Even for me. And I've been quilting and doing all that for a while. And it's still, because I know how much it can affect like the level of tension. And I mean, it was a mind blown moment when I learned that bobbins have tension that can be adjusted too, especially on the industrial machines. And so tension definitely, if you're not comfortable with it, I would suggest learning about it, because it definitely plays a big role in a lot of the sewing that you do, not just quilting, but yeah.
Definitely. I think in both the free motion quilting courses that I teach, there's a whole session on that. In fact, it might even be the longest like video on there, is all about tension and a kind of an exercise to get them to go through that. And the same for the Thread Matters course, because it's so vital to understanding everything that comes afterwards. You know, if you don't understand that, you're not going to have a smooth experience with it. So yeah,
Absolutely. Guys, we are running low on time, so I'm going to speed our track so we can hit all of these things. Let's talk real quick about the quilt management under the throat. Whether you are using a walking foot and just doing some straight stitch quilting, or you are doing free motion. Who wants to jump in and talk about some of that bulk management?
Okay.
Yeah, somebody talk about this.
So for me, I would teach, because you don't want any of the bulk of the quilt to be hanging off your table, because you're going to be fighting against that the entire time. So it's about finding a way. And I know a lot of people roll their quilts and clip them. I tend to like to accordion fold, because then it can kind of work with me. The accordion fold's working with me, whether I'm working up against the bed of the throat of the machine, or I'm working up against me. I also try and put a pillow or something in my lap to bring the quilt sandwich up to the same height as the table. And then if I accordion pleat my quilt in my lap on top of that, it just kind of works with me going back and forth.
Interesting.
That seems to work well for me.
Yeah, I usually do the roll method, but that sounds like it would work. I'm going to try that with the accordion for the free motion portion.
Going like this when you're saying roll, because I do the roll method too, Rona. What is this, Joe?
Yeah, no. See, when you roll a quilt, it just becomes this great big unwieldy kind of like lump that kind of it seems to steer. It steers your quilt where you don't want it to go, right? And you don't want that at all. You want to have the free movement of it and be able to move it yourself. And a similar thing, I think, to what Jane does, but I don't concertina it as such, but I kind of galette it. So if you know about a galette pie, you know, where they just kind of take the pastry up and they smush it all around the sides, that's kind of how I handle a large quilt. So I kind of just smoosh it all around so I can get to the bit that I need to be at, and all the rest is kind of free, and it's, you know, it's more able to kind of get into little areas and move around as I need it to. So yeah, but having it supported by as many kind of tables and side tables as possible is the best thing.
What about you, Sheena? What's your preferred?
I'm a scruncher. I scrunch it up. I've got a standard domestic machine. It's not one with a big throat. It's just a small domestic machine. So I scrunch like crazy. I'm lucky now I've got a flatbed table, so I can drop my machine down into it. But in classes, we don't have that. So if they don't have a table that they can add to their machine, I suggest they get encyclopedias or box files and create a nice big table around their machine, so that helps with the drag. Remind them not to drop the quilt down into their lap, but to actually lift it up so that it doesn't get trapped. Keep it simple.
Absolute. Yeah. Let me ask a quick question. When I first started, I didn't know about, I call them quilty gloves, but when I finally got a pair, I was like, oh, I can actually hold on to my fabric. Anybody want to talk about those real quick and explain what they are and whether you use them or not? What's your favorite brand and why? Or
I fought using gloves for years because I thought nobody can tell me that I need to do that. But then I tried them and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my favorite one is the Machingers. Those are the ones that I really like. They're lightweight, they're breathable, they have like a coating around all the fingers. I've also used the little nubs that you can put the finger cots that like bank tellers use. I've put those on a couple fingers too and used those. It's just all about having that contact. I've also used little paddles, like I think Handy Quilter calls them sweet spots.
Yes.
I've used those too, and that way you don't have to have the glove on. But you definitely want to have the best contact you have with your fabric sandwich. Otherwise, you're fighting it.
Mhm.
I just tell people the less you have to worry about, the better you're going to have a good time quilting. You know, it's so, yeah, take care of that contact and have that contact with your fabric.
Yeah, I was like you. I fought for a long time not to get gloves, and I don't even know why. Like, you have a reason, I don't. Like, I just never got them. And then when I finally did, it was like night and day. I was kicking myself for not getting
Yeah.
them sooner. Yeah.
I see Joe once again. Joe's always no or mhm.
Yeah.
Mm, very,
I
very
have to own up
visual.
that anytime somebody wants more than a quick what is free motion quilting, I say go to the Crafty Nomad. She is my free motion quilting maven.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, my favorite gloves are Fons and Porter gloves. They are cotton, so they're breathable. My hands don't sweat in them, and yeah, I like the fact that there's kind of rubber pads on the palms as well as the fingertips, because I use that quite a bit as well. So yeah.
Now, do you ladies wash your gloves?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. I've had that question in the store. They're like, what do we do with them? I'm like, wash them. And then one lady goes, no, you just throw them away and buy a new pair. And I'm like, ah. I'm like, how dirty is your gloves getting? That's what I mean.
Yeah,
You
'cause
sometimes get
the-
holes in them. They do get holes in the ends. So yeah.
Yeah, and then like I found ones that have the lighter color or white tips on them. Some of the ink from the fabrics, especially if you don't pre-wash your fabrics, which I generally don't, that's gonna rub off on them. So yeah, they definitely get dirty. And of course, ones if you do sweat inside, because some of them are thicker. And Joe's right, you can like your hands will get a little sweaty inside them. So yeah, you definitely want to wash them. And generally, they're cotton or some sort of washable material. They're meant to be washed.
When I'm
Absolutely.
teaching a class in person and it's like maybe at a guild where it's not in a shop where they could go buy a pair of gloves, I'll take the rubberized shelf liner and cut it into small
Mhm.
squares and then just give those people that. At least it creates some kind of contact for them. So there are other ways to go around it, you know, if you don't like the gloves.
Like a MacGyver moment.
That is a MacGyver moment.
No.
We'd have like an overlay MacGyver moment.
I know, seriously. Okay, so real quick, you know, in the beginning, we're like, there's no way to fill an hour. And then when we get closer to the hour, we're like, oh my God, we need 2 hours. So, real quick, I know we talked on the long arm quilting session about bringing the bobbin thread to the top. So one of the questions from a newbie might be, or no, they might not even ask this question because they might not know it. But in domestic, I see Sheena already shaking her head. Do we bring the bobbin thread to the top?
If you're starting
Absolutely.
quilting inside the quilt top, absolutely. If you're starting off on the outside edge beyond the quilt top on the backing and the wadding, not necessarily, but any chance that it's going to be seen anywhere, absolutely, because you need still to be able to tie that knot and bury those ends.
And how do
Do
they
not
bury them?
use your machine cutter.
Yeah, no.
How do they bury the ends, Sheena?
Okay, so I pull my 2 threads up to the top, tie a knot around my finger, pull it tight about, you know, sort of so away from the quilt top, get an easy thread and needle, lay the threads over the top, click them into the hole, and then bury it down into the wadding and bring it up sort of 1/2 inch away and give it a tug so that the knot seats in the wadding.
For
Yeah,
your
make sure that it's
wadding is batting.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I keep saying wadding. Yes,
No.
batting, batting.
yeah. And yeah, and make sure, because I've done this by accident. So make sure when you're burying your threads that you don't accidentally go through the back fabric. You want it to go in between the sandwich.
Yeah. But definitely in through the wadding, because if it sits between the fabric and the wadding, it could be visible.
Yeah.
And there's no wadding batting to grip it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a 1 minute answer, either Jane or Joe. Talk about the game plan for free motion. Do they need a game plan? Do they need to draw it out with one of our marking pencils? Like, talk about that real quick.
Okay, so yeah, I would definitely have a plan before I start. Even if I'm doing just a basic all over design, I have taken time to think about that and to figure out how that's going to, you know, translate onto into fabric. I've drawn that out, you know, with my hands. I do that moving from the shoulder to try and mimic that movement of the quilt. That's absolutely important, but if you're doing something more involved, then it's even more important to draw it out. So if you want different designs in different parts of the quilt, for instance, very important to do that, and to get a sense of how big your design is going to be compared to the one in the next section, so that you have some sort of even kind of density, you know, going across the whole of the quilt. Yeah.
And when they're using rulers versus free motion, do they need to draw a map, or what's your suggestion, Jane, if they're using rulers?
Yeah, I mean, the same thing as Joe said. For me, I tell them to print out a picture of what you're quilting, whether it be a whole quilt or a block, and print it out on paper and just spend some time doodling on it and coming up with a cohesive plan or something that you're comfortable with. I always tell students too, if you're only comfortable doing like stippling, then don't plan on quilting feathers, you know, like just do what you're comfortable with, and that, you know, so you're not stressed over the whole thing. So yeah, same thing with rulers. I would plan it out. I would have my picture and plan it out.
One of the best pieces of advice that I was ever given for free motion quilting was actually from Mark Sherman. He said, because he was teaching feathers, and he said, whenever you're doing free motion quilting, draw it out on paper first, for two reasons. One, because you're going to see what it looks like, but two, you're giving that or you're implanting that memory of motion into your hand, the hand brain connection, hand eye coordination. So you're actually like, you know, it's the same thing like my mother used to tell me, if you want to remember something, write it down, because
right.
it's the actual yeah, exactly.
I have designed workbooks on that premise. Like each design page has a clear plastic overlay, so you can use a dry erase marker to follow the arrows and get your muscle memory and learn your designs down. So it's the same thing. And I had keep a whiteboard in both of my quilting rooms, and just for that purpose, so I can draw it out and trying to figure it out if I can't think about how it's going to go.
Yeah, I love those dry erase boards. I use them all the time.
I do too.
The main reason why I asked that question is because a lot of beginners think that you just sit down and go at it. They really don't realize how much prep work there is prior to needle to fabric. You know, there is a lot of prep work away from the machine to have a successful, you know, end game for sure. Let's talk real quick. We haven't talked about the muscle soreness and proper body mechanics. Who wants to chit chat about that real quick? What's your favorite technique, Joe? Are you doing it in like 15-minute sessions? Are you making sure you're sitting up straight? Are you on a bouncy ball? What are you doing?
No, I probably fall foul of all of the wrong things, but no, I'm kidding. I think the really key thing is to have your body in the right position first. So, you know, make sure that, you know, when you are sitting at the table where your machine is, and I mean the top of your table of your machine, not the table it's sitting on. Ideally, the machine would be lowered into it and they would both be the same thing. But your elbow, when you bend your elbow at 90 degrees, that your arm should be at the same level as your table, to give you less issues with your shoulder and your back. You know, that might mean raising or lowering your chair. It might mean, you know, changing the height of your machine or that kind of thing, but that's important to get that right. And the same with your knees, should be at 90 degrees so that your feet can be flat on the floor. So getting that right, I think, solves a lot of issues down the line. But no, when you said, do I do it in 15-minute sessions? I don't think I can restrain myself to stopping after 15 minutes. Once I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone, and I'm just going to keep going. And I do find that I do this, you know, I hunch and hunch down, and you constantly have to remind yourself to, you know, stretch out and that. So I guess if I pause, then when I'm pausing to reassess where I'm going next, then I'm taking the opportunity to stretch out and roll my shoulders at the same time. So yeah.
We had a lady come to the Charlotte Guild one time, and she was from a physical therapist office. And at first we were kind of going, why is a physical therapist coming to a guild meeting, right? But she said, similar to what you're talking about, when you're quilting for a long time, it doesn't matter if you're quilting, piecing, I do it too. You start to do this, and you don't mean to, but you're constantly doing this, and then you're tight and everything's sore. So she said, not just sitting up straight, but she said scooch forward in your chair so that just the top of your rear end is sitting on the edge of the seat. That forces you to sit up straight. And then she said not just relaxing your shoulders, but rolling them backwards so that you're trying to push them together. That stretches those muscles and that get really sore when, you know, you don't have the restraint to stop every half hour or so to move around.
The nurse in me is trying to put out there, like, you know, whether you're piecing, quilting or whatever, but I do know, Joe, about when you're in the zone and it's working for you and the quilt's laying right and everything's good. You don't want to stop because you finally have everything in proper position. But yeah, the nurse in me is screaming circulation, circulation, circulation. Yeah. And preserve your muscles. So that's why I was hinting to the whole 15 minutes. You know, whether we are quilting or piecing, beginners might not realize that it's a whole different muscle group that you're using when you're sewing. Because even if you're using the foot pedal, right? So frequent get up, walk around, you know, get you something to drink. That's very healthy for you.
Mm-hmm. Even if you I have to set an alarm for myself. Otherwise, and in fact, I did it yesterday because I didn't set the alarm, and I'm trying to finish this quilt sample. And I mean, it literally went from noon to 4 p.m. like that. So yeah.
It definitely happens. So guys, we are at the end of our hour. I swear we need a whole nother session, but let's wrap it up. I'm going to give each one of you a quick chance to put any last bits of advice or something that you feel like maybe we left out because we are crunched for time. And then of course, as always, we end off with Rona telling us what's amazing going on in her life over the next couple of weeks. But Sheena, what is your parting words for anyone that is thinking about trying to do domestic machine quilting, or maybe have been doing it a while, something you just want to put out in the universe?
Yeah, so don't be constrained by the ditch. Go beyond the ditch and come and do a course with me online or whatever, because together we can go beyond the ditch.
I love it.
That's a good one.
Love it.
Joe?
Okay.
Yep. I guess my last piece of advice would be for people to be brave and bold in their learning, to practice, so not to worry about it. I've got some ladies that are just starting a course with me at the moment, and one of the comments that came up was that they were even worried to start on the practice pieces. But this is your chance to fail. You know, this is your chance to make those mistakes that where it isn't on a real quilt. And I want you to be bold and to brave and to enjoy it, you know, so yeah, go for it.
Love it. Jane?
I would just say, off of what Joe said, have fun and enjoy it. Be proud of what you do. It is just needle and thread. If you make a mistake, it can be fixed, or just, again, make another mistake the same and it looks good. I'd love to tell people that I have a YouTube out there that has lots of free motion quilting content on it.
What's your
to,
YouTube channel?
it's Jane Hauprich.
Okay.
So it's out there for lots of free content on there. And I have a long list of more that I'll be putting out there. And a lot of my content I do on a stationary long arm. I do that more. So it's the same premise as domestic free motion quilting. You're moving the fabric. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. Ladies, you guys have been wonderful. Real quick cap for me. You guys know that I'm the owner of SewEndipitious quilt shop here in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So next week, I'm headed to Florida for the Husqvarna Viking Sewing Machine Convention. Super excited about that because they are releasing their Epic 3. And I don't know if you guys have seen the video. Rona, you might, because I know you're on my Facebook. But they now have the biggest hoop in the industry, and the girl that's demonstrating it, I swear, now she's smaller than me, but she pretty much fits in the hoop. It's ridiculously big. So I do a lot of my quilting for like my table runners and placemats in the hoop for my embroidery machine. So
Yeah.
I'm so excited about that. And then the week after that, the last week of this month, I'll be in Houston for Quilt Market. Are any of y'all going to Quilt Market? No one. Rona, let me.
Sorry.
I know. I wanted to go to market this year. There's several people. In fact, one of our friends from the UK that's going to be there. Actually, a couple, I think, are going to be there
Oh,
at
yeah.
market this year. But yeah, I due to personal life circumstances, I won't be able to make it down, which sucks. But I'm sending my love and support to all of you that go to market and festival. You're going to have a blast. I know it. So yeah.
This is my first year, so I'm pretty excited, but at the same time, I'm kind of intimidated just by the thought of all the amazingness and all the amazing
Yeah.
people that are going to be there. So I'm going to try to be a sponge and absorb it. And anyone that has an accent like you, Sheena, or Joe, I'm going to walk up to and be like, do you know Joe and Sheena, or have you met her in her travels? And I'll see if I can find some of y'all's friends. But that is what's going on at SewEndipitious. Rona, round us out. What is going on with Rona, the traveling quilter?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so most of you that have been following us know that I just spent 2 months in the UK. And so I'm feverishly editing and putting together the book that's all coming out. The episodes start airing in January and the book is out next spring. Joe is actually going to be on the show. So also, if you have not signed up for my newsletter, be sure to sign up for my newsletter because next week there's going to be a special newsletter going out about a new book launch that has been a secret that our man behind the curtain, our Mr. Oz here, Mr. Steve Baker and I have been working on. So that's coming out in the newsletter next week. And then, oh my gosh, there's so much that's coming between the YouTube show and the newsletter. And then we've got, unfortunately, I can't tell everybody everything that's coming. But yeah, but definitely sign up for the newsletter because that's where you're going to hear about everything first. So yeah, and maybe some special discounts and things like that.
You never know what is happening with Rona. This is
That's
so
true.
true. And this is the funny thing, because I know Rona so well. You can look at her face and tell she's dying to give everybody all the secrets and all the great things that is lined up. But I'm just going to tell you, I know for a fact she's got stuff, amazing stuff lined up all the way into 25 and 26 right now. I'm still back on 2020, but this girl is way ahead for sure. But ladies, thank you all so much for joining me and Rona tonight. We definitely appreciate it, and we appreciate you working with the different time zones. And Jane, thanks for being a repeat offender here at Quilt Babble. I've enjoyed it. Rona?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, we're going to put in the comments, you should find links for all of our guest websites and information. Definitely check them out, follow them, sign up for newsletters, check out their YouTube channels, all that good stuff.
All of the good stuff. Guys, for now, this is Lisa Baker and Rona Herman. Sheena, Joe, Jane, thank you so much. And we'll catch you guys next time on Quilt Babble Live in November. Topic will be soon, guys.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.